It was a sunny day on the coast of a modern city. People were going about their business. Some were just walking. Some were taking their children to school. Some were going to work. There was one guy in the crowd. He received a notification on his phone. It was Choi Ji-min, who asked where Do Hyuk was. He read the message and answered it, continuing to walk down the street. And in a moment, he bumped into a man with a huge package of goods that he was carrying in front of him. This stately man looked at the boy with an angry look. Smiling awkwardly, Do Hyuk apologized. The man smiled and apologized in return. They parted ways, and the boy breathed a sigh of relief. Do Hyuk walked to the supermarket. He texted Choi Ji-min about it, and she replied with a post-it note. Do Hyuk was shaking. He threw his hand up in the air with joy, scaring the people around him. This guy was a first-year student. He had no friends at all, but he seemed to have found a girl who cared about him. A mysterious girl with glasses and a book in her hand. Her name was Choi Ji-min. Until recently, Do Hyuk had only been able to look at her from afar. He was at the boxing gym, training without enthusiasm. Ji-min walked into the gym. She shouted at him that he would succeed. This distracted him, and he missed a punch from his coach. Do Hyuk got a little bit of a punch in the face. They met at a club where they joined to get in shape. While achieving their goals, they became friends and started talking about all sorts of things. Sometimes about their favorite books, sometimes about movies, sometimes about games or music. They exchanged small messages and stories. Finally, this weekend, they arranged to have dinner at Do Hyuk's house. He needed to cook something. In front of the market, he was thinking about the menu. He thought of meat and vegetables. Then he remembered the drink, which immediately made him think of something more intimate. He imagined Ji-min asking him to sleep in the same bed together. It was just a dream, but he hoped there was at least a chance. The baby in the mother's arms behind the boy poked at Do Hyuk, who was smiling very strangely with his eyes closed. He looked to the side. A huge shadow was falling on him. It was the Black Tower, which was shaped like a screw. This building, more than 200 meters high, had once appeared out of nowhere. There were 2,365 such towers in the world. When they appeared, people panicked. Religious and scientific organizations of all countries were studying them. But so far, no one has learned anything. This tower that came out of the ground is just standing there. Before Heck was in the store shopping. As for that tower, people quickly got used to it. The curiosity lasted no more than 3 weeks. Do Hyuk had spent all his money on dinner, and now he would have to save. And everyone went back to their everyday life, including Do Hyuk. The guy gave the cashier a payment card. Fight. 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 These words were repeated by a crazy man with a joker's smile. He was screaming. Steel mechanisms rumbled. Do Hyuk's face was terrified. He did not understand what was happening. There was banging all around him. Do Hyuk didn't know if he was imagining things. The cashier was taking a payment card. Do Hyuk asked her to take it. But the cashier was out of it. Her eyes were rolling, her mouth was drooling, and she was open. Her eyes were rapidly turning red, and she was making choking sounds. Do Hyuk was scared to death. The ant was flying upwards. Her head was tilted over. The boy was asking for help. Suddenly he dropped all his food on the floor. He saw that everyone around him behaved the same way as the cashier. The man was shouting and turning his head in different directions with his eyes rolled up to his forehead. All the people had veins protruding all over their bodies, no pupils in their eyes, and were screaming wildly. Do Hyuk was petrified. The mother and child also became as if possessed by a demon. Do Hyuk could not understand anything. This horror did not end. Suddenly, there was silence. Everything stopped in the supermarket. The cashier began to rejoice at being alive. Do Hyuk looked at her with fear. The cashier looked at her hands with tears in her eyes. She raised her fist in the air with a victorious cry. Everyone around them started hugging and rejoicing that they were alive. Do Hyuk did not understand what was happening. All the buyers were shouting that they would start all over again, from scratch, and began to make plans for this time. Someone shouted that he would be the strongest. Do Hyuk felt a strong blow to his back. It was a guy, bleeding, with a sharp object in his head. The cashier was standing there covered in blood, with a pair of clerical knives in her hands and a wild smile. She thanked the customers for shopping with them, and invited them to come back. Suddenly, a child with a paw for a hand sliced the cashier's head into several pieces. Do Hyuk looked at this bloody horror with frightened eyes. The little girl with wild eyes was surprised that she could use the creature. The cashier wanted to take it away from the girl, and open her mouth like a dinosaur. It chewed off the girl's head to her briefcase. Some of the people around her were scared that she had used the creature. Another guy was worried and didn't understand where his powers were. A man with long hair exhaled smoke from his mouth. He shouted the word status. The conditions for activation were CO2 were met. His hand began to cover with ice. He stood with his hand covered in ice in front of the man in the yellow suit. He begged her to wait, because he couldn't use his powers yet. He was terrified, begging for salvation. The man's smile was terrifying. He swung his fist with incredible strength and pleasure, and hit the man in the yellow suit. Do Hyun still stood petrified, smeared in someone else's blood. The white-haired man with the bloody fist was smiling. Do Hyun looked to the side, frightened. A guy in a black suit stood among the shelves. His smile and red eyes were intimidating. He said, blowing smoke from his mouth, that Yoo Do Hyuk was there. Everyone turned abruptly. Wearing blood-stained clothes, they stood in front of the boy. They were saying his name. Someone said that if it was true, and the first-level Great King was there, then everything could start over. They wanted to kill Yoo Do Hyuk. These words frightened Do Hyuk. Someone made a rose out of a glass bottle. He wanted to kill him with his own hands. Everyone wanted Do Hyuk to die. Another man took out a knife. He wanted to take the creature away from Do Hyuk. Everyone was coming closer to Do Hyuk, who did not understand what was happening. He was ready to run. The man with the knife in his hands and the scar on his face was laughing sarcastically. He ran up to the boy and stabbed him. Do Hyuk turned around. He fell to the ground and hit the table. The knife landed a centimeter from his neck. The man with the scar exhaled smoke from his mouth and wished Do Hyuk dead. He laughed nervously and hoped it was a joke. Do Hyuk was hit in the face. The man with the scar said with fierce passion that Do Hyuk was his prey. He sat on the floor scared to death. Do Hyuk realized that this was no joke. There were people standing in front of him with different weapons and a desire to kill him. He looked at them. Suddenly he got up and started running as fast as he could. Everyone started chasing him. He was running and thinking how they knew his name and why they were trying to kill him. He did not understand the reason for all these abnormal events. People were killing each other. He picked up the phone and called the rescue service. He kept running, looking at the phone. He ran across the road where a car was driving. Do Hyun was hit by a car at high speed. The car door was kicked open from the inside. It was a man with a scar who asked Do Hyun not to run. The boy stood up and continued to run, screaming. He met the man he had hit on the way to the store and asked him for help. The man turned to him with a bloody face and asked him his name. Do Hyuk was glad to have met someone and hoped for the man's help. He was holding an axe. There were corpses around him, and he was holding a fire. The man thought that this time he seemed to be lucky. With a shout and a fire in his ear, he said that a spot in the Phenomenal Nine would be his. Do Hyuk covered his face. The sound of a stun gun. Shock arrows flew into the man's back, paralyzing him. He fell down, and there was a girl behind him. It was Do Hyuk's girlfriend, who, with a stun gun in her hands, asked about her friend's condition. He was surprised to see Ji-min. The man with the scar turned around. People kept running like crazy to kill him. Ji-min reloaded her stun gun and said that Do Hyun was lucky that she was nearby. She told him to be careful, because he was still alive. Her face was very serious. Do Hyun did not understand. Ji-min shouted that the enemies were surrounding them, and they had to run away. The wild crowd was getting closer. Do Hyun did not understand what enemies they were talking about, and why they were enemies. He said that everything was normal a minute ago. She addressed the boy in a calm tone. The cars around were smashed. Everyone was killing each other. The streets were in chaos. Did Do Hyun really think what was happening around him was normal? Do Hyun tried to say something. He stepped on something. He looked down and saw that he was standing on the hand of a dead girl. Do Hyun was disgusted by this. Ji-min yelled at the guy who was vomiting to wake up. If he continues like this, these creatures will kill them too. The crowd of wild creatures continued to run in their direction. Ji-min said that it would soon begin. The steel mechanism was in full swing. The girl asked to leave all questions for later. She took off her glasses and threw them on the floor. Ji-min gave her hand to Do Hyun, who was on the asphalt. He was tired and asked where she was going to take him. She stepped on her glasses. Ji-min said with a smile that they would go to his house. The mechanism in the tower continued to work, and time passed. Flames began to appear. The tower was illuminated by the orange sky. A multi-story building. Ji-min and Do Hyun ran into the apartment and closed the door. The boy wondered what it all meant. Ji-min turned the lock. She realized that Do Hyun didn't remember anything. He didn't remember anything that happened before he came back. Do Hyun still didn't understand anything. Ji-min was interested in the weapon, which was desperately needed. She briefly explained that all people wanted to kill Do Hyun because he was the most attractive target for them. He didn't understand why. He hadn't done anything. There was no reason to kill him. Ji-min closed the curtains and asked him to calm down. He could not calm down after seeing the chaos. Ji-min pulled his clothes and came closer to him. She shouted and tried to calm Do Hyun down. In a few hours, it will be midnight and one bastard will come to take over the land. Do Hyun has to win, has to lead the people to kill that damn god. The boy didn't understand how he was supposed to kill the god. Even in boxing class, he would fall down from being slapped. Do Hyun did not understand how this was possible. Suddenly, an earthquake began. Ji-min did not understand why it happened so early. She looked out the window. Outside, a fierce tornado was passing by, lifting and demolishing everything in its path. But this was no ordinary tornado. It was a tower. Something strange appeared before Do Hyun's eyes. It was the inscription. Universe 54 MRA Planet 913. Launching the program. Casita's needle. Ji-min turned toward Do Hyun, who was screaming in pain. He felt as if his body was about to break into small pieces. He fell to the ground and continued to cry. He saw an inscription that said body completion and force development. Ji-min fell to the floor screaming in pain. Do Hyun looked at her, but was unable to do anything. He let go of her. He stood up and held his head. Ji-man was still lying on the floor. Do Hyun ran over to her and tried to revive her. She made a sound. Do Hyun realized that he was lucky, that nothing was wrong. The pain was just gone. And he saw that he had grown a little bit. Do Hyun felt that he had a strange power in his hands. A hologram appeared in front of his eyes saying that the completion of his body was complete. To check his ability stats, he had to say, status. Do Hyun wiped his eyes, thinking he was just hallucinating. Expectations. He didn't have time to think about it. Reality was like this, so all he had to do was adapt. He shouted out to find out the status. He saw his abilities. It indicated that there was no religion and no technique. He had the second level of existence feature, and was the owner of the Wolf's Eye. Ji-min said that this was a parameter window, and that she would get tired of looking at it in the future. Do Hyun had the basic characteristics. He was surprised to see how his girlfriend looked. Her female parts had grown significantly. She said that the same thing had happened to him. Their bodies were enhanced to the maximum. Do-hyun didn't understand how this could happen. His abs had become incredible. He thought God had done it. Ji-min and Do-hyun looked outside. Everything in the city was destroyed. In the sky there were 2 moons of different colors and sizes. They were in a multiverse created by the Black Tower. Every time it rotates, another world is superimposed on the Earth. And now the people of this world are going through a return. This return meant that memories from the future were returning. Ji-min's memory also returned from the future. Do-hyun didn't understand what it meant by the future. Ji-min explained that it was different from the future he had imagined. The god who had caused the Black Tower to appear had forced people to improve and gave everyone an ability. The ability was called a being. People could take the creature from each other. Thus, they were forced to play a deadly game called enlightenment. It didn't matter who started it, because from that moment on it was a fight to the death. Chaos reigned in the world. Many people died during the whole period of enlightenment. And in the end, 9 people stood out among the people whose powers were superior to God. People who were equal to God were feared and called the Phenomenal 9. Ji-min tried to remind him that Do-hyun was called the Great King. He was the strongest of the 9. Do-hyun didn't remember that. But he realized that because of the thing, everyone wanted to kill him. Ji-min leaned forward. She jumped higher than her head, folded like a basket, and landed back on her feet. Her creature was a flexible body like rubber. The possibilities of her body went beyond human norms. She said that there were only 2 beings to be received. One was given at the beginning, and the other came from the first opponent killed. She didn't understand what she would do if they killed Do-hyun. Those monsters were terribly determined to kill the great king Yoo Do Hyuk. The boy asked about his ability. Ji-min told him to see for himself. He saw the inscription, "Taste of Steel," in front of him. And this was not the only ability. The second was, "Beyond the Horizon." He got it for killing Kasita. Suddenly, a bright light came from the window. The streets were engulfed in chaos. Fights, blood, murder, and at some point it stopped. Everyone turned to the light. There was a pillar of white light above the tower. There was a roaring noise, and a sphere came out of the sky. It was something shaped like an egg. Golden light filled the streets. Something began to hatch from the egg. Ji-mina looked at it, and did not understand who it could be. It was some kind of deity with huge wings flying over the tower. Its hair resembled feathers, and its eyes were golden in color. This creature had a strange smile. It raised up its staff. After that, a strange energy was created around the tower. Golden feathers fell all over the city. Do-hyun picked one up. Ji-man tried to warn him, but she didn't have time. He took the feather and disappeared. Ji-man was desperate. She flew into the apartment. The enlightenment came earlier than she expected, but she knew that the boy would be okay because he was Yoo Do Hyuk. Ji-min ran down the hallway. The pillar of magical light continued to shine above the tower. People turned to the sky. A blue magic circle filled with energy appeared there. Some people ran, others stood still. Someone finished off an opponent and laughed like a madman. The piano did not stop. Do-hyun landed on the dirty tile. He was holding his head and didn't realize where he was. In a second, he was at the foot of the Black Tower. There were several others like him. The divine bird raised its hand with 3 golden rings. At first only the wings were visible, and then the full-fledged creatures appeared. They spread their wings. The people at the foot looked up. Do-hyun was surprised. The man next to him could not believe his eyes. It was an angel. He had an ugly face, sharp teeth and ears. He said that the people were in a specially isolated area, and that everyone there would have to pass a difficult test. First, they had to fight some creatures. They looked like cute little green hamsters. These creatures did not frighten the man. He did not understand what specially isolated area they were talking about. The angel angrily said that the man underestimated them. He made a sound to silence him. And in an instant, half of the man's body exploded. The angels were laughing at the fools. They were too tired to fool around with them. Some kind of liquid got on the man's body in a t-shirt. It came out of nowhere and smelled bad. Do-hyun turned around. He saw something strange land on the asphalt. It was a head. A bloody head. On the floor were piles of bloody corpses. Those green creatures became huge goblins that cut people with blades and ate them. This monster fell on Do-hyun. The monster roared with all its might. It made terrible sounds, and there were many of them. The creatures were everywhere in the city. People were looking at them in shock. Saliva was flowing from their mouths, and their tongues were hanging out. The angel said that the special pheromone he sprayed stimulated the goblins. Those who score the most killing points will be rewarded. Let's do it. The goblins opened their mouths to the maximum. They jumped on the people who fought back with their fists and kicked their feet. The man with the stone hand had a lot of rage. With his hammer fist he beat the goblin so hard that its head flew off. For killing the goblin, he received 140 coins. Another girl had the ability to accelerate the growth of plants, and the second one allowed her to control objects. She ran past the growing roots of a tree. This tree grew and pierced 2 goblins. She received 180 coins. The man laughed at the simple task. The goblin's bites were like an armor for him. He turned to Do-hyun, who stood there numb with fear, and called him a disgrace. These words cost him his life. Do-hyun was in shock. The man was gnawed by goblins from all sides. Another goblin grabbed a girl who begged to be released. The goblins continued to attack the people. They didn't die. They seemed to come back to life like zombies. Someone's hand grabbed Do-hyun's leg. The man without half his body did not understand why he could not move and asked for help. The angels called what was happening a test. This made Do-hyun angry. The goblins were killing the girl. But in a moment, one of them got a spit in the face. Do-hyun, with a metal stick and fury in his eyes, began to fight back. Strike once. He struck again. He spun 360 degrees to save the girl. Do-hyun asked her if she was okay, but he saw that she was dead. This upset the boy. The angel was happy to have such an interesting challenge. Looking at the crowd of these huge goblins, Do-hyun wondered if they had any chance of surviving. The city was destroyed and surrounded by a barrier. The sounds of battle could be heard. Dead goblins were lying everywhere. Do-hyun was holding a bloody fire extinguisher. He walked down the corridor from the pile of dead goblins. A staircase. Do-hyun sat down. No matter how many he killed, new ones came. He looked at those goblins with fatigue. He didn't know how long this would go on. His phone fell out of his pocket. Do-hyun looked at the phone. There was a photo of Ji-ming. He decided to find her. He asked Do-hyun for her status. His stats had changed quite a bit. He had 740 coins on his balance, got the first hunter achievement, and gained +2 to his physical strength, durability, and speed. Do-hyun became interested in strength and wanted to learn more. This parameter was responsible for vitality, resistance to physical attacks, and adds the ability to regenerate. He wondered if he should buy some extra durability. It wasn't too early for him to die. He bought the strength and spent almost all of his coins. Behind him he heard a laugh. The man stammered and greeted with a sick smile. He asked Hyun if he had found anything good, licking his teeth with his long tongue. The boy gripped the fire extinguisher tighter. The man attacked Do-hyun to take his valuables. The boy sprayed him with foam. He took him by the throat with his hand, threw him to the ground, and began to strangle him with loud screams. Do-hyun was scared. The man was dead. He was sitting on top of a motionless body. Do-hyun put 2 fingers to the man's neck to check for a pulse. The guy was scared. He had killed a man. But a moment later, a blade flew into his hand. The man laughed at the boy and pulled the blade out, cutting through his arm. The creature that the man received was playing dead. He continued to beat the boy with his weapon. He kicked Do-hyun. The boy fell to the ground. The man licked his blood and told the boy that if he wanted to kill him, he should be ready to cut his throat. The wounds that were inflicted by the man's knife do not heal. Therefore, if we leave all the wounds as they are, Do Hyun will die from lack of blood. That man was crazy. He said he would cut the boy until he died. The man stabbed Hyun in the chest. The man was sure that the boy had gotten a bad IT. He beat Do Hyun and kept telling him to die. Do Hyun didn't understand. Him? Die? His thoughts were jumbled. Fight, die, alive, mom, kill Do Hyuk. Yoo Do Hyuk was asked to regain consciousness. The conditions for activating the taste of steel were met. Do Hyuk's hand trembled. The man swung the knife, shouting at him to give up the IT. The boy stopped the knife with his hand. The recognition of the object began. It was a call knife, which had the effect of accelerating blood loss. The command to activate the creature is food. Do Hyun, choking on blood, said the activation command. Suddenly, an orange beam rose up and enveloped Hyun. His hand swallowed up the sword. The man was petrified. Flames came out of Hyun's hand. His hand was filled with golden energy. His eyes glowed. He stood up. His white blood cells began to circulate faster, and his wounds began to heal. The man did not understand what was happening. He was screaming like crazy. Do Hyun punched him in the face. The man flew back against the wall. The guy was already standing on his feet in a wreck. He didn't understand how it happened. He was ready to die. The man thought that Hyun had eaten the atom and was healed. He realized that Hyun was the great king. This is the being of Yoo Do Hyuk. He looked at the man with a fire extinguisher slung over his shoulder. The fight between them continued. The man's teeth were flying out. Hyun broke his arms and legs with the fire extinguisher. He punched him in the face in anger. The man tripped on the stairs. Do Hyun stood there, staring furiously. The man fell down the stairs, bleeding to death. For killing the man, Hyun received a reward of 17 coins. He threw the fire extinguisher. He was shocked to realize that he had killed a man. A reward for murder? He didn't realize it. He felt sick again. Hyun felt bored. His physical condition was poor. He could barely stand on his feet. Do Hyun fell down. His body did not obey. He passed out, his eyes slowly closing with the realization that this was not going to end well. The conditions for the activation of the creature beyond the horizon were met. When the creature's owner receives a stimulus that goes beyond the ordinary, its abilities increase in proportion to the impact of the stimulus. Supercompensation was activated. Supercompensation is a recovery process after strength training that makes muscles stronger and more enduring. Do Hyun opened his eyes. He got to his feet. He picked up a fire extinguisher and stood there with a serious face. Someone asked Do Hyun if he was not motivated. The person who asked was a freak who was there when the monster started killing people. Angel. He was the one who started it all. Do Hyun was full of rage. He took a swing at the angel sitting in the window, but missed. The angel laughed at him. He touched his finger to the fire extinguisher and said that the boy was a fool for attacking the angel. Do Hyun was punched in the stomach and flew away. The angel said that the boy didn't look like the kind of person he usually tortured and killed. Do Hyun stood next to the stairs and did not understand why the angel had done this. He explained that the area of enlightenment had not moved in the last 3 days. Do Hyun realized that he had slept through those 3 days and was shocked. The angel growled at Do Hyun. He took him by the skin of his teeth. He dragged him down the stairs with a wild smile. The angel said that since he was so lazy, it meant that Hyun was already confident in his abilities. The boy did not understand where he was being taken. The angel brought him down to the bloody floor, picked him up by Do Hyun, who begged him not to go there, but the angel threw him down anyway. The angel expressed his regret that the boy had relaxed so much. In the room was a crowd of dead, bloody people. Above them stood a creature with a chain in one hand and handcuffs in the other. The angel introduced Do Hyun to the final boss. The angel told Do Hyun that he was not bad looking. He had green skin, round eyes, and a big mouth. There were 2 angels on a pillar near the tower, watching people from the ground. The boy demanded the next test from them, and the girl indifferently asked if it was with goblins again. The only thing she liked about goblins was that they brought more money. Angel liked their determination. He straightened his hand and formed a blue energy sphere. He opened the gate and summoned the monster named after him. The angel said that he was giving them a good bonus. A huge cross appeared in front of the people. The angel was sure they would appreciate it. In a moment, one guy's head was torn off. Others began to run away. Chains flew at them, hitting the wall and breaking it. It was the same monster that Do Hyun had seen. It crushed a person with its foot and stopped. The named monster, the Sissa Killer. The task was to try to win and survive. Do Hyun was lying on the floor among the dead people. The huge monster stood in a bloody robe. The angel told Do Hyun to challenge him as well. If Do Hyun defeated the monster, he would receive a huge pile of coins. But any approach would not work. A new opponent approached the monster with a knife in his hand. He started running towards the monster. He circled around the monster with incredible speed. But the monster cut him to pieces. The boy underestimated the dynamic vision of Chi-Chek. The 2 angels on the pillar told the people to earn coins and improve their abilities as soon as possible, because with their current level, they would not be able to kill a fly. The boys called the angels bullies, and did not understand how to earn money if there were no goblins. The angel told Hyun not to slow down, because they could kill not only goblins. The hunt for people began. Some people began to grow sharp claws. Some people had spikes growing out of their skin. Do Hyun stood in fear. The angel was smiling slyly. A monster appeared behind the boy. Now Do Hyun wondered how much he would get if he killed the bastard. He was told that he would only find out if he challenged him. Do Hyun realized the hopelessness of the situation. He decided to choose his own ending. Behind Do Hyun was a guy with pincers who was going to kill him. Do Hyun spoke to the barbed chain. After these words, the body of the boy behind him did not move. The angel stretched out his hand with an energy sphere and pointed it at the immobilized boy so that he would not interfere. He dissolved into pieces. The angel finally decided to tell him about the reward. The thing that would fall out of him would give him an undeniable advantage in future battles. The angel pressed Hyun to take his chance, his face frantic. Hyun thought that this crazy man was inviting him to his death. Everyone began to discuss the boy who went to fight with his bare hands. Some thought that he was rather confident in his being. It was Do Hyun who was flying next to the angel. He was interested in the plan. It was not easy to dodge the chains. The monster had a fairly wide radius of attack. Its skills were advanced and extremely frightening. The monster was holding a bloody sickle on a chain. They were equal in physical strength, but Do Hyun's strength and speed were greater. He thought he had the advantage. He clenched his hand into a fist and ran toward the monster, his heels shining. The monster launched its sickle chain. Do Hyun dodged it. The chain was only a few centimeters away, but he couldn't dodge the hook. The chain wrapped around his leg. The monster threw Do Hyun, who hit a pole. The boy felt a great pain. Do Hyun fell down. The sickle landed in the ground. The boy twisted his arm to the point of veins. Screaming, he swung and jumped at the monster. The hook flew and grabbed Do Hyun by the shoulder. Then it cut his leg. Do Hyun screamed in pain as he sat across from the monster. Chae-chek pulled at his chains. He dragged Do Hyun along the ground. He screamed that he could not stop. The monster spun him around in the sky on those chains. But Do Hyun landed bloody against the wall with the flag. The monster stood unbreakable. And the boy fell on the car. The monster was approaching the immobilized boy. It jumped on Do Hyun. It kicked him in the human face with its foot. Everyone around him was watching and wondering if the boy had a plan. It's not enough to go at a monster with just a fighting spirit. Blood was shed. Do Hyun's eyes opened. He sat there bloody with a pierced shoulder and wondered if he was going to die. Would he really die? The hook was still holding his shoulder. So was his leg. The monster stood in front of the boy, holding the chains. Do Hyun made a decision to fight. He activated his taste of steel skill. With a smile, Do Hyun said the word to activate it. Food. His body began to absorb the monster's steel weapon. A golden light shone. Hooks disappeared from his shoulder and leg. The monster saw that its weapons had melted and was surprised. Do Hyun attacked the monster. The audience was surprised that Do Hyun had eaten the item, and that his wound had healed. This creature tastes like steel. With incredible fury, Do Hyun fought the monster. He hit the monster on its ugly face. This enraged Chae-chek. The monster hit him back. His hook sank into Do Hyun's cheek. Blood gushed out. The floor became even bloodier. Do Hyun looked up at the monster, furious. He kicked it in the head. The monster flew backwards. Do Hyun raised his fist. He hit the monster in the shoulder. Do Hyun continued to punch the monster with all his might. The boy fell over, despite the hooks in his body. With his face pierced through, he swung and hit the monster's face. His hand was covered in blood. He beat Chae-chek mercilessly. His rage knew no bounds. He crossed his two arms and hit him with a swinging punch that knocked his head into the ground. The spectators realized that they were seeing the great king in front of them. The monster was defeated. Do Hyun stood over it. What he did was the creature of the great king. It stood with a hook that pierced its two cheeks like a kebab. Yoo Do Hyuk spoke the word to activate it. It was released under the steel in his body. The wound from the hook healed before their eyes. Everyone was shocked by what they saw. Do Hyuk still didn't understand what was happening. Why he had met those nits. How they knew him. And why each of them tried to kill him. He didn't know the reasons, but he could say one thing. There was no need to approach him. And if the warning was ignored, then let them have it. The other players stood around and realized who this guy really was. Two of them wanted to kill Yoo Do Hyuk to become stronger. They tried to persuade them and explain that they were no match for Hyuk, who had killed the monster with his bare hands. People like them are not capable of wielding the power of Yoo Do Hyuk, the great king. Yoo Do Hyuk stood there with an angry face. The angel was laughing. He was planning to have fun, but unexpectedly, Do Hyuk killed Chae-chek. The angel flew over to Hyun. He gave him a reward. It was a book. Hyun took it in his hand in amazement. The angels flew away saying that Hyun was an interesting boy and hoped that he would be more active in the future. The angel shouted that everyone had done a good job and offered to continue the test. The goblins were supposed to appear on the second day, but they were out of sync with the other sections while they were having fun in a specially isolated area. People were looking down on them. 3 angels in the sky raised their hands to the mountain, and a golden light came out. They set everyone to a test ordeal for 2 days. The black tower began to rotate. This meant that the layering of worlds would happen again. Cars were flying in the air. The earth was splitting. A huge tree rose from the ground. Do Hyun and the others ran away from it. The angel said with a smile that on the 3rd day of the test, they would be waiting for people in a new arena. Do Hyun kept running. The people of the special zone were wished to survive. Stone cliffs grew in the city. An overturned truck lay in the middle of the road. Do Hyun was sitting in the luggage compartment. In 3 days, the world turned upside down. He realized that Ji-min was telling the truth. During the trials, most people die. Goblins, blood, knives. What was happening was a drama under the wrapper of a game. For some reason that Do Hyun didn't understand, he was a famous person whom everyone wanted to kill. He was holding the IT in his hands. Do Hyun's ability is to absorb them. Attacking just for the sake of the items is a complete foolishness. You need skills to survive. The people he was dealing with wanted to kill him. The book the angel had given Do Hyun was on the floor. The mess that was happening around Hyun did not allow him to give up. Do Hyun found out the status by looking at the book. It was a secret book of fist and foot techniques. In order to get one of the techniques from C to AAA rank, he had to read that book. Do Hyun took up the title page. His face was worried. He opened the book, and the hieroglyphs radiated light, absorbing into Do Hyun's skin. The knowledge was absorbing him with a grinding sound. The hieroglyphs reached his face. He did not understand what he was feeling. Hyun received the technique of the extremely strong foot. When the strength of a technique affected by the degree of mastery is agitated, a special condition is activated. Do Hyun suddenly remembered how to use the technique. It was based on kicking. He threw off his bloody shirt and picked up a can of soda. He wondered if he was physically strong enough to master the technique. Do Hyun stood with his eyes closed in front of the can on top of the boxes. He opened his eyes with determination and swung his leg at the target. But his supporting leg twisted. He fell to the floor and tore his clothes, not knowing how to master the technique. His stomach growled. Hyun wanted to eat. He happily took the hook to the rukta, saying it was his turn to be the snack. He said the word food to activate. Golden light flowed from his hands. The absorption was complete. Hyun gained the third level of pain maximization. Every time he used this ability, a terrible smell would appear. He looked at the other hooks and realized that he needed to eat them as well, because the weapons were as good as food. He anxiously said the word for activation. Suddenly, he fell to the floor. Hyun had received level 4 pain maximization. He was still bothered by the terrible taste. He looked at the gauge. It said that the extra calories would be converted into coins. He received 566 coins. His total balance was 644. Hyun sat on the floor and was pleased with this automatic exchange for coins. It gave him the motivation to endure that awful taste. He was still sitting in the truck. He looked out of the truck and wondered if anything would happen if he got out. There was a man on the truck with a dagger waiting for Hyun. With his sixth sense, he felt someone standing behind him. The man attacked Hyun, who had just gotten out of the truck. But the boy managed to turn away. The man said he had seen Yoo Do Hyuk in action. The guy called him a bastard. He remembered the man with the scar who had tried to kill him before. The man waved his dagger and said that he had seen him slay a monster with a name and called Hyun lucky with a smile. Hyun wondered who the man was and how he knew him. The man smiled when he realized that Hyun really didn't remember anything. He called Hyun heartless and began to attack Hyun. He swung his dagger, and Hyun kicked him back. The man called Hyun's attack useless and asked him why he was not using the creature. The fight continued, and Hyun fought back. The man with the scarred but kicked him in the stomach. He was coughing and expressing his frustration with Hyun, who was lying curled up on the ground. The man mocked that Hyun was lucky to have killed Sisik. He had lost his memory and forgot how to fight. These words only made Hyun angry. Marks appeared on his face. The technique he had just learned was activated. Hyun swung his leg. But the man managed to turn away. But a moment later, the man's face was kissed by Hyun's boot. He kicked him so hard that the dagger flew away. The man picked up his fist and noticed that Hyun had changed his movements. The boy jumped higher than his head, which puzzled the man. He activated the technique of an extremely strong foot. It curved in the air, a salamander trident. First level. Hyun's lightning-fast kick hit the man with the scar. Hyun stood in a stance and marveled at what he had done. He appreciated the power of his technique. The man with the scar was lying face down on the ground. He stood up abruptly with a grunt. Hyun didn't understand how he could be okay after such a blow. The man sat up and scratched the back of his head. He said that if he hadn't had the atom, which softens the blow, he would have thrown his hooves away. Around his neck was a necklace that looked like a pectoral with diamond-shaped stones. He told Yoo Do Hyuk that he had adapted quickly. He asked if he also needed a second creature from him, or if there was another reason. He thought that the man had enough coins and atoms to kill monsters. The man with the scar got to his feet, energy flowing from his fingers. He said that the reason was quite simple, that since Hyun, who had received God's blessing, had lost his memory, he would be the strongest. The fight continued, and the man attacked Hyun with his dagger. He wanted to destroy Hyun, so that he would no longer claim the title. He promised that everything would happen quickly and stabbed him, but Hyun managed to dodge. The man with the scar kept hitting him with his fiery fist. Hyun was hit in the face. The man with the crazy face said that this time he would kill Hyun. Suddenly, his hand was stopped by Hyun, who made a cut. The man with the scar fell down. Hyun jumped up. As he was landing, the man shouted that he was a fool for using the same trick. Hyun gathered sand in his hand and threw it in the man's eyes. It blinded the enemy, who called Hyun an asshole. He couldn't see anything, his eyes were red, and he was waving his arms in all directions. The blinded man shouted that only a coward would use such dirty tricks. At this point, Yoo Do Hyuk continued his attack. He used the technique of an extremely strong foot. But during the next kick, his nose bled. The man's necklace cracked. Salamander Trident. First level. The level of technique improved to the second of 10 levels. Hyun stood in a stance with frightened eyes. He saw a bleeding man with a scar in front of him. Once again, Hyuk couldn't realize that he had killed someone. He was looking at him. The man was quietly saying in his last breaths that he had no weapon, no powerful item, and even no memories. He had also received God's blessing. Hyun asked him what kind of blessing. The man laughed and said he didn't even remember. He spoke of perfect beings from another world, who interfered in the affairs of their world. He laughed while choking on blood. Hyun did not understand what was so funny. The man was smiling. He said that Hyun was no longer the great king he used to be, not the number one, not the strongest of the phenomenal five, not the legendary warrior who had gone against the god. He was only a rapper. The man angrily sent Hyun away and said that he had no chance against the god. Hyun looked at the death convulsions. He said that next time he would be the great king. These were his last words. Hyun received a message that he had killed a man and was rewarded with 51 coins. Hyun hit the ground with his fist in anger. He didn't understand why he was the only one who didn't remember anything. Hyun was in the truck. He was already standing with the dagger in his pocket. He covered the man with his old sweatshirt and took his black one. Hyun did not know what to do. He put on the scarred man's sweatshirt and felt something in the pocket. There was a map with a circle on it. He suspected that this was the location of the god that the bastard was talking about. He decided to make sure of it. Hyun felt obliged to at least take a look at the one who was considered to be the perfect creature. The waterfall flowed through a crack in the rock. Hyun walked through the ruined buildings. He pulled up his hood and looked around. There had to be a secret place behind the waterfall. Hyun stood in a dilapidated passage with light coming from it. The walls were lined with stone monuments. Hyun looked around. He stood in an archway and dared to go. Hyun took the first step. He came to a dark hall with a stone throne with a strange sculpture on it. It surprised Hyun. A fire was burning on the stone pillars. All the torches lit up at once. The hall became brightly lit, blinding Hyun. He did not understand who was sitting on that throne. It was a huge woman with a crown and dragon-like creatures on both shoulders. A hologram appeared in front of Hyun. He received a message from the goddess Kahura in an incomprehensible language. The voice in his head asked him to choose. Hyun remembered that something similar had happened in his room earlier. The goddess said that she would guide him. Hyun was shocked that a stone statue could communicate. She said that she was Kahura, the queen of the fire of hell, the creator of this world. The ruler to whose worship and service Hyun would devote his entire life. She said that even if he had previously followed other gods, she would grant him the flame of mercy and give him strength if Hyun swore to serve her. The goddess Kahura demanded that he bow down before her. She encouraged him to kneel, bow his head, and swear his allegiance. Hyun did not understand whether becoming a believer would give him power. He wondered about worshipping before God. A god who suddenly appeared and forced everyone to participate in a deadly game. A god who plays with people like chess pieces. Hyun remembered what Ji-min had said when she told him that he had to lead the people to kill the cursed god. He shouted that he didn't need a blessing. He shouted that he was not going to follow God. Hyun fell face down on the floor. It was as if he was crushed. The goddess called him a fool and told him to crawl on the floor until he regained his faith. Hyun lay there and wondered if it was true that everything that was happening was the work of the gods. Was it because of them that everyone was fighting and killing each other? And knowing this, he was asked to turn to faith. Hyun kicked his hand and foot off the floor. He apologized and said that he would never submit to God. He stood up on his own 2 feet. The goddess was curious about the reason. Hyun was standing in a huge burning hall. The goddess did not understand why Hyun was refusing to do so. Hyun turned away from the flames and saw the goddess. She took on a human form and walked down the steps toward Hyun. She raised her finger at Hyun and said that since he had decided to become a sacrificial lamb, she would take his heart. Hyun's chest began to burn, and he screamed in pain. Fire was pouring out of his chest. The hologram showed that all the conditions for activating the creature were fulfilled. The goddess was on fire. Her fire consumed the entire room. She approached Hyun and asked him why he did not want to obey her. She threateningly asked him if he still wanted to love God. She asked in a devilish voice why Hyun did not choose her religion. Tears were pouring out of Kahura's eyes. She said that Hyun had mocked her, and that for this sin, he would die a martyr's death in the fires of hell. Hyun fell to his knees, and blue light came from his chest. The creature, beyond the horizon, had been activated by the intervention of the goddess. The powers were cancelled. The goddess Kahula was confused as to why her powers had left her. She screamed with all her might. The system notification informed about the violation of the rules. An eye for an eye was applied. Kahura was stripped of her goddess status. Her arms and legs were shattering like crystal. She did not understand why. Light was pouring from inside her body. Kahura was screaming, calling Hyun worthless. He raised his eyes and looked at her. Kahura was devastated and didn't understand how Hyun could have divine power. Hyun was blown away by the blast wave. The palace of the goddess was collapsing. The angel was worried and clutched his head. He was shocked by what was happening. Goddess Kahura had disappeared. A new crack appeared on the rocks, which contributed to the destruction of everything around. The angel, biting his fingers in anxiety, said that the earth would shake and the sky would split. The power that had lost its master would flare up and burn the world to ashes. The black tower was glowing, and the wind was blowing. The angel saw a hologram of the earth, where part of it had disappeared. He said it happened earlier than expected, but there was nothing to be done. He decided to try to fix the situation by imposing another world. He held 2 holograms of the earth in his hand and pushed them together. The whole earth absorbed the destroyed one. The tower began to spin. The stones flew up. Feathers fell out of the angel's wings. He looked out over the horizon and began to laugh. The angel was flying over the desert and said that it looked like everything was carefully covered. He sat down on top of a cliff. He looked into the crater and felt that the strange boy was somewhere nearby. He wondered if he had died in the explosion. The angel saw something under the fallen rocks. He came closer to look and saw the dagger that Hyun had. The angel held the dagger in his hands and looked at it, and thought that if Hyun had held on a little longer, he might have survived. But now the angel would have to grieve again. The angel was grabbed by the leg. It was Hyun, who had been burned in the fire, with almost no hair left. Hyun could hardly speak. The angel smiled and said that he had never doubted his abilities. Hyun was lying under a rock wearing a necklace and holding a dagger. He was barely breathing. Hyun touched the necklace and dagger with his hands and said the activation word, food. The angel pondered. Hyun emitted green light and regenerated his body. The angel sat next to the boy and wanted to see his status. He thought that Hyun was too normal for someone who survived the explosion. The angel saw some mistake in his status. While the angel was looking for something in his stats, Hyun had already recovered almost completely. Hyun had the first animal breeder achievement, which gave him +3 to his magic and beauty stats. The angel saw something stuck to his hand. He thought it was part of Kahura's spirit. Hyun got up and took his hand away. He told him not to touch it and asked what he was mumbling about. The angel noticed that Hyun had grown up. Something like a spirit stuck to him and saved him. The spirit was weak, so it quickly became attached. The angel was holding a cube. It was a special reward for Hyun, a cube of black fruit. It was a basic necessity for the nomads of the dune desert. A fragrance product created from the extract of the black agave fruit that grows in a dune. It naturally shrinks in volume in the air and releases a fragrance. Although people did not feel it, the scent scared away uninvited guests who could come from underground. This time, the layering of the world happened unexpectedly. It would not be easy for Hyun to get through. Hyun took the cube in his hands and smashed it open. He said it was another test. And so it was. The cube was to be used for 48 hours. At the end of the time, the angels would come and exchange the remaining volume for coins. The angel advised him to put it carefully in his pocket so that the smell would not fade away. Hyun didn't understand why he needed the cube. In the desert, sand was kicked up on the horizon. It was the goblins, those uninvited guests. Quite expected for an angel. Behind them was a huge worm, which demolished the goblins. Angel wished Hyun to have fun. The ruined buildings stood against the black tower. The goblin was lying on the floor, dead. Ji-min was unhappy with the item that fell out of it, namely another bone knife. She said the word collection and put it in the box. Ji-min was holding a cube. There were many other ways to get great items and a large number of coins. As before, the fastest one was killing people. Behind her, someone said that she was collecting all kinds of junk again. She was attacked by a man with tattoos. His iron hand passed by Ji-min's face a few centimeters away. He said with a stern face that Choi Ji-min was still as pretty as ever. She asked him to shut up and moved his hand away. This man's name was Kong Hu-rak. She advised him to keep his mouth shut if he attacked her from behind. He hugged her and asked why she was so serious. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, but Ji-min was clearly not happy to see him. He asked her if she was nervous without Yoo Do Hyuk around. Kong Hu-rak squeezed her chest and reminded her that they were friends before he returned. He said that Hyuk didn't remember anything, so he suggested that she leave the useless boyfriend and join his team. He promised to take care of her if Ji-min became his girlfriend. Kong Hu-rak showed off his arm and said that this time he had gotten an A-class weapon. It was Old Man Gak Hae-ryang's rusted brass knuckles. She raised her thumb up and ran it around her neck with a sly smile. Kong Hu-rak looked down at her with his head held high and said, "So that's it." He was ready to take Ji-min away without any problems, despite her wishes. Kong Hu-rak was about to attack her, but she dodged by doing a backflip. But this was followed by a kick to the jaw from Kong Hu-rak. Her shoes were smoking from the impact. Ji-min ran away. She stopped, crouching down behind Kong Hu-rak. He took a swing and asked if she was flirting, but she grabbed his wrists and threw him over herself, knocking him to the floor. He called Ji-min beautiful while she sat calmly on top of him and held his arm in a lock. There was a loud sound. Kong Hu-rak screamed and told her not to play with him or she would die. He took a swing, Ji-min ran, looking at him with a stern look, and knocked him down again. Dust kicked up. Kong Hu-rak was lying on the floor, apologizing, saying he was in the wrong and acting like a child, while Ji-min looked down on him. He took off his brass knuckles and told Ji-min to take them away since she was collecting the items. He didn't want to mess with this girl. He held out his hand to her. Ji-min looked at him with a slanted look. She grabbed his hand and twisted it toward his back. Kong Hurak screamed in pain. She walked out of the destroyed building with new items. Ji Min looked ahead of her. There were 3 people standing there, one of whom was clapping his hands and saying that he had not expected anything less. She took down Kong Hurak in 2 counts. Ji Min asked Julian if he had come to have fun. She was already reaching for her brass knuckles. But Julian was scared and said he didn't come to fight and asked me not to look so fiercely. He said that he was still joining the team. Ji Ming said she had no desire to join such a rabble. Julian said with a smile that it looked like Yoo Do Hyuk was dead. Ji Min stopped. Julian said that this was unverified information, but they had heard some rumors. Those with 2 beings were missing. He didn't know where Yoo Do Hyuk was, but he wondered if a guy who lost his memory could survive the ordeal. Before he returned, he was called the Great King, but now he was definitely dead. Julian said this with pleasure. A man with his abilities should always be prepared. Julian offered to cooperate with Ji Ming. He believed that he was more suitable than anyone else for the role of someone who would lead humanity. He advised her to forget about her dead husband. Ji Ming reacted instantly. She put on her brass knuckles and ran towards Julian. She was already near him, but he looked quite calm and relaxed. The blow happened. There was a powerful sound, but it was past Julian. Ji Ming was gone. Julian realized that he had been thrown. He could see a silhouette on top of the cliff. Ji Ming was standing there. She was holding a cube in her iron hand. It was not important how strong he used to be. The strong must protect the weak. Then and now were different. Hyun knew nothing about this world. He was afraid that he would be killed. Ji Min grabbed her head and closed her eyes. She tried to bring herself back to consciousness. Tears were streaming from her eyes, but she was determined. She wanted to collect a bunch of ITs before she met with Yoo Do Hyun. The worm was crawling on the dune. Ji Min fought it and thought about Hyun. She knew he was alive. There was a rock with a cave in the dune. There was a silhouette of a boy. It was Do Hyun. On top of the cliff was a man. He took a rock and was going to throw it at Do Hyun. He was furious. The unidentified man took a rock and was going to throw it at Do Hyun. He was furious and wished to die. He threw the stone. Do Hyun sensed the danger. He jumped up and broke the stone with his hand. He looked up. The stranger was already running, shitting in his pants. Do Hyun ran along the wall, climbing up. The stranger gave up and left his clothes and bag behind. Do Hyun thanked the stranger for the gift. He did not understand how someone could leave such valuable things behind. Suddenly he heard someone's voice saying that they had finally found a place to hide from the sun. Hyun spied on them. They were saying that they wouldn't have to use the cube there. One of them said he was going to die from the heat and took off his backpack. A man with glasses asked for water. 2 girls refused him because he had recently been drinking. He angrily shouted at her why she was responsible for the water, and he had to carry a dirty and heavy bag. The girl in the red suit asked if anyone had asked him to go with them. Another girl with a tattoo on her forehead took hold of his head. The portable altar gave powers only to the first 3 believers. To awaken them, they decided to cooperate until they found a victim. The girl in the red suit told him that if he didn't believe them, then why didn't he come here alone? He was old enough to understand that everyone is responsible for their words. He called her a damn bigot. The woman with the tattoo asked them to be quiet, listening to something. She opened her elfin ears and concentrated. She activated her ability. Bird by day, bat by night. The woman realized that someone was watching us. She concentrated, realized that someone was nearby, but could not understand where exactly. She asked the girl to take a bottle. She was drinking water. The man grunted as he looked at her. The girl threw the bottle down and became petrified. She activated the usurer's nose ability. Her sense of smell was maximized by the water in her body. She sniffed. It was an unfamiliar smell. The girl pointed her finger at the top of the rock. The man said that the victim was found in time and said he would bring her. He asked to prepare the altar. He was asked to wait. The woman activated her ability again, but found nothing. She shouted at her husband to take his time and stop. He said he had nothing to fear and came across a silhouette. Yoo Do Hyuk hit him, and his glasses flew off. He fell to the ground. Do Hyuk jumped up and continued to finish the man off. The cube fell out. They were all on the same plane. Hyun picked up the cube. The woman recognized it. She realized that Yoo Do Hyuk had lost his memory. Hyun looked at her. She didn't know if Hyun was looking at the cube or the coins. Do Hyun was looking at her with a scary look that frightened her. She realized that there was no point in competing. The girl took the altar out of her backpack. The woman looked back at her with a frightened smile. If she gave him the altar, they had a chance to be saved. There was only one thing. The woman looked horrified and apologized to Ani. The girl had stabbed her in the stomach, afraid that the woman would give the altar away. The girl thought that believers should not do such things. The woman begged to be released. The girl exclaimed with crazy eyes of joy that God's blessing would be hers. She furiously hit her head on the altar. Do Hyun looked on in bewilderment. The woman's face was bleeding on the altar. He was activated. The girl was overjoyed. She was not going to give up her blessing to anyone. The activation was successful. The altar opened, and a creature began to gather from there, piece by piece. It was a god of great height. God Kokyudal demanded to bow before him. He asked the girl if she was a believer who wanted to receive the power of that body. She said yes. Gina said she was a devoted believer. God had allowed her to rise. Gina walked up to him. She climbed in and was happy. While inside, she saw a mistake. Not all the conditions for activation were met. The number of people who accepted the religion was less than 3, the physical strength less than 100. God Kakudnal was disappointed with this weakness. Sharp thorns came out inside. God called her too weak and told her to give up her flesh and blood to become food for God. She began to be squeezed inside the robot god. She was scared because she did not know that there were conditions to be fulfilled besides giving blood. Gina shouted out to Do Hyun. He stood there petrified. She begged him for help while the thorns clutched her body. There were tears in Gina's eyes. But the thorns crushed the girl that Do Hyun was awake to. Blood poured out like rain. Yoo Do Hyun requested the status. He saw the characteristics of the name monster, where everything but strength was unavailable. An angel appeared. He flew up to Do Hyun and said with a smile that perhaps the end had come for him.